Well, thank you so much for this wonderful event, and congratulations to nasscom for hosting this really well. It's a pleasure to be associated here. The name is called GCC Conclave, and the topic we're here to discuss is how Indian enterprises are using this model. But for those who have been in this business for a few decades, and I'm not even saying years, I'm actually going decades, would realize that this business has evolved. And if I reverse the gear, it's called GCC now, but it used to be called captive centers, and then prior to that, it was called shared services. And the driver to all this was cost arbitrage, which meant multinational companies taking advantage of low-cost locations and building their capabilities here, basically to achieve the cost arbitrage model. That is now history. Nobody talks about that. And in that thought process, you would think, how would an Indian enterprise benefit from a cost arbitrage model? The fact that Indian enterprises are adopting the GCC model clearly shows that there is much more to achieve from a value proposition beyond the cost arbitrage factor that we say. What is that? Why is that? That's what we're here to explore. But before I even go that way, I just want to say that the nationalist within me, the Indian within me, is very proud to see Indian multinational companies going out, spreading their wings, going into other countries, distributing their products, and we have two representatives here that will actually talk about that. So I do want to start with you, Amitesh, and ask you, why? Why would you even go for a GCC when the resources that you're hiring are, for lack of better words, at the same cost at which you would hire in a GCC or in your corporate headquarters? So give us a little bit about the why, and then we'll go to Vivek to also understand his perspective.
I think for Vedanta, it's more than a why, because the capability centers, what is now being created around tech, because Vedanta is a metal mining resources company, and it has evolved a period of time. We have seen that, how these decentralized functions were available in each of the business units, especially in India, because we have businesses outside India as well, in South Africa, Zambia, Australia, Middle East, etc. But I think we have seen that, how these decentralized functions, when they came together and started standardizing, then it actually gradually transformed into these capability centers around tech. And we are so much into resources that we have to have quality, and few other initiatives as well. And we found that having a central function, of course, it has, even we say that, the GCCs are evolving more than a cost arbitrage, but I think cost arbitrage still hold good. And especially when it comes to standardization and putting those SOPs in place, which can be copy-pasted and applied in various situations in different, with slight tweaks in different geographies. But the core essence of these problem statements and the solutions remains the same. So I think over a period of time, just beyond cost, we realize that these processes are turning out to be very useful and is yielding much more. And it has been evolving. And I'll touch upon later as to how we are using new age startups in terms of helping the capability centers we have. I don't know if we call them capability centers, but it's something which has evolved over a period of time. And I think why came naturally, because the benefit which we saw and gradually transforming into some sort of a center which is tech-centric and is able to deliver different needs, different aspects of the businesses, because we have huge diversification when it comes to business, and we are seeing that value of standardization, and I think that's how it is evolving over a period of time.
Isn't that interesting, right? A decentralized business taking advantage of a centralized function and bringing value, especially on the tech front, right? Vivek, what would you like to say? You're part of the Birla Group. Give us some perspective from your eyes.
So I myself come from a very digital commerce startup kind of a world and joined Birla Group about a year and a half back. So I've seen both sides of the coin. So before I talk about the need that Birla Group felt for some of these centers, and we used to call them centers of excellence. We right now call them group functions. So I just want to use an analogy first. I was talking to somebody, a colleague of mine, about these centers, and the analogy he gave me, and I really resonated. sometimes these centers of excellence are like, a very super specialized high-speed boat trying to help a big ship navigate through a stormy weather, right? So I think if you look at it, the business context is changing very fast, technology, digitization, AI, whatever, very fast-changing world. Conglomerates like Aditya Birla Group need to navigate this at speed. They're a bit lost at some level. I mean, they have all kinds of access to knowledge and consulting partners and whatever, right? But they're still a bit lost. And they need help to navigate. So in terms of, so if you look at Aditya Birla Group, I think centers of excellence always existed for functions like chartered accountancy and HR and whatever, right? But what has emerged lately in the last few years is centers around technology, digitization, going cloud native. Sustainability is a big theme, especially because in manufacturing. So there's a lot of centers of excellence emerging in these areas. Marketing, what does marketing mean in the digital world, right? And so we have group functions that address this. And in terms of need, there are 4 areas that I think we primarily look at. One, the talent that these functions need is at a very different level. And the ability of individual companies to be able to hire this talent is a little limited, right? Both in terms of offering career growth, or concentration of talent, or ability to hire the comp that high-skilled people need. So that's one. Second, a need that arises is there's a lot of strategic thinking. A lot of this change, and I think also the solutions are outside in. They're not inside out. And companies are not necessarily geared for it. They're busy doing their day-to-day ops and monthly targets and whatever. So a lot of this thinking starts from conferences like this, consulting partners, strategic advisors, chairman cell, chairman thinking on those lines. So there's a lot of strategic thing, and these centers of excellence are very closely working with the leadership, top leadership, to drive some of these strategic initiatives around digitization, sustainability, scorecards, and so on. So that's the second need, to have these centers. The third need is to have a neutral view. And for an example, one of our group company CEOs wanted to know what is our digital maturity for his company. So the answer he was getting from the consulting firms, which was saying, you have way to go and you need to give us business, to the other extreme where the business was saying, we look reasonably good, we have enough tech, this must be digital, we don't know anything else. So there needs to be a neutral view. And these centers of excellence also provide that neutral view, which isn't really biased either way. Right? And the fourth need is that this change to navigate needs a lot of engagement with the ecosystem. nasscom, industry bodies, government, startup ecosystem, and so on. I think a lot of sessions on that. And that is, again, something that individual companies and branches cannot fully do, and they don't even understand the domain very well. And centers of excellence really help provide that engagement with the industry also for us.
Interesting. A high-speed boat trying to navigate choppy waters and reaching a destination. That's a really good analogy of what we're going through. But let's go a little deeper now, right? If I go back to my days of setting a GCC for a multinational company, what would happen? Somebody from headquarters would come, visit 3-4 locations in the country, maybe evaluate Eastern Europe and some other low-cost locations around the world, which has great capability. They would sign off, the exco would sign off, and then they would hire a local leader, and there'll be sourcing of talent and good salaries. If I were to ask you the challenges on the ground in really bringing up a GCC, the playbook that we use for multinational companies, is it the same that you would use for an Indian company? What are the kind of challenges you face? How do you compete for talent in the same market where you have the Walmarts and the big multinational company giants actually, with strong brand names, hiring the same talent? Give us an example, Amitesh, of how you deal with these challenges and what more beyond what I've even asked to.
So with regards to tech, the biggest challenge what we face is the change management, especially in Vedanta, because we are a very traditional company in the way we operate and what we do. So we realized instead of buying the talent, why don't we build it? And if you see our COEs and especially what we do at Vedanta Spark, some of these people who are really adding value are from the people within, and that's how we have groomed it. And now I think being competitive in the market and showcasing that this is just beyond creating COEs, you being part of the operation and adding value to the overall organization and compensating them well and showing them the path that this is not just a back office work, but you have to partner with the operations and make real impact in the overall operations has been very successful for us. And one point which is really helping us in terms of our journey with this is being diversified. It's not easy to standardize things. And the way we have seen is, even though we are diversified, but some of the core processes remain same. And if you are able to deliver something successfully in one of the units in India, that same zinc process can be applied in Gamsberg in South Africa. Now, the cost arbitrage of course plays, because something what you have built in India can be applied maybe 3x or 4x lesser than what you could actually get in South Africa. That is working out really well. And in terms of being competitive in the market, in terms of giving them the growth, giving them the compensation, and giving them the visibility that they're part of the core is something what we believe, and we're enforcing to see how we can, build on.
Amitesh, if I can just build on this, sorry, because one of the words you use is triggering another question in my mind. You talked about bringing people closer to the business and the impact of the business. And I know from your role, you're also involved in startups, and I'm also referring to the session before this. Has the startup ecosystem helped you in overcoming these challenges and also showing that value proposition to the colleagues around you that are actually providing? And I'm sorry, I'm just building a context out of your question here.
Absolutely, that's a fantastic point, Manoj. And as our chairman says, that while we are bringing this COE in terms of who works with a startup, very similar to what we heard in the last panel, we do the same, that we bring the startups to our platform and then see how they can help us operationally and grow with them, scale with them. And then we also have a venture capital, which I lead, where we can invest in the startups as well. Now, working with the startups is actually helping the youngsters, because we hire a lot of graduate trainees and the management trainees right out of the school. They realize joining Vedanta can give them an opportunity to work with the startups, because we are working with more than 100 startups at the moment in the whole group, and 100 startups, maybe say around 500 people are working with the startup operationally. So that entrepreneurial and the startup culture is very, very helpful in terms of shaping this whole center of excellence and Vedanta Spark, because you have to act like a startup to work with. Right? And I heard one of the questions, how you should, as a corporate, should, act when you have to work with a startup. I think just act like a startup, because you have to be very agile, bring some policy changes, which we have done, because it's not easy to work with a startup. And the most difficult part is to onboard a startup, because if you go through the regular procurement policies, it's absolutely like uphill task to onboard. But those policy changes, etc., is helping a lot. And bringing that culture, I think that cultural shift with the youngsters, and now it's a race, because we're trying to develop an incubation cell in Vedanta itself, and somewhere in a very remote location, because we work in very tough environments, like in Barmer, Rajasthan, Udaipur, Chhasugra. These are tough geographies to operate. And then we are trying to build a capability centers with incubation to inspire people that, okay, I want to be associated with something like that. And that adds and that builds on to the journey which we want and the growth we want with these.
I mean, and very interesting value proposition, which we may not even get in leading multinational companies because of the kind of environments that you operate in. Linking that value proposition to the talent that you're hiring actually makes it a lot more interesting, relatively, and depending on how it's perceived by your future colleagues. Vivek, how about you? Again, Birla and Vedanta are very different organizations, but very interested to hear your challenges on the ground.
Sure. So I think the challenges are common to most of these arrangements, which is basically one is around talent. I think it's a universal problem, especially for emerging skill sets. And second is alignment, organizational alignment, change management. So anyway, so we have gone through a lot of this churn, companies aligning, not aligning, projects kicking off, not sustaining enough and all that. So we have kind of boiled it down to like 4 areas which we try to gear our ways of working and communication and everything around. One is talent. So on talent, I mean, I think everyone struggles, but given that we are an Indian company, conglomerate, not known for digital technology, we struggle a bit more. So what we have done there is, really invest on hiring thought leadership, top leadership. And that works out because, the hiring happens right at the top. So the buy-in and vision building is easier. People get it. And then we leverage a lot of young talent to bring in the energy and the enthusiasm, right? And we need to bridge the gap between these two. So that's one thing we do. Another thing we have done is once these youngsters come in and they get trained, they are also very great hunting grounds for our companies to hire. And they also become ambassadors for the group functions when they go into these companies. So that's working out very well. A lot of cross-training gets done. The second challenge we have is around change management. And what we have done there is one, see, we are lucky in the sense that our centers of excellence are basically playing to the strategy that the group is really focused on already. And these are already part of CEO goals and board goals, which helps. But I think on the ground, alignment is still required. So any of these initiatives that the group function tries to enable is driven on a monthly cadence with the CEO and the board, and on a weekly cadence with the operational heads. We make sure that cadence happens. We bring in people to the group function, corporate offices to brainstorm. The team goes out in the field and works with the team there to get it done. Another thing we have done on that alignment function is to remove the threat that sometimes companies feel in terms of control or flexibility, right? So these group functions are working primarily as enablers, and they help build the group companies, get access to vendors, come up with statements of work, reach startups, hire talent, etc. But the idea is not to quote unquote replace these functions or these jobs at all, right? So that's very, very clear. So there's no threat perception there. The third area is around ecosystem. I spoke about it a little before, but it's still a challenge. I think, again, the kind of talent that works in these centers of excellence is also better tuned to give confidence and trust to the startup ecosystem. When they meet them, they talk the same language. A lot of these guys come from the startup ecosystem. They're not another world or manufacturing setups or big factory people. They're different, so they're able to bridge that gap even with the startup ecosystem, right? And the fourth, which keeps coming up all the time, and I don't know if we have a great answer, is the funding model for these capability centers. It's how do we measure ROI? Who funds them is always a big question mark. And though there is no great answer, I think the way we have tried to resolve it for now is to make sure that the centers of excellence don't become too big. They remain very, very lean, and they remain enablers. And they're not trying to, it's not about how many people do you have, what is your revenue, none of those targets, right? It's about what value creation have you enabled for the group companies. Right. So that is where the funding becomes reasonably lean. The second thing we do on the funding part is bring in this concept that startups do, which is the agility part, right? Pick up a lot of experiments. You don't have to spend 3 months making sure this will succeed. Pick up a lot of experiments, do a very small POC, see success, nothing works like success, and then get the funding from the businesses to scale it up. Don't ask for big funding just to do experiments. So those four, I think, are the areas we try to really be very, very careful on and have cadences on.
Very, very interesting again. And if you take this whole analogy of funding and talent development and hiring, if you were to kind of compress this into one module, what would be an ideal like outlook of your colleague, and how many years do you think you can see the output coming from a colleague that you hire in terms of progression, in terms of capabilities, and where do you see these colleagues actually forming into your group functions within a Birla Group kind of environment?
I think there's two parts. So one is the campus hiring really young talent. I think we get them off the ground very fast. They are, and they go. We don't have iterations saying you need to start doing. For example, technology. You code, and then you do low-level design, then you do mid-level design, high-level design, etc., and then you get to see the business guy. I think from day one, they need to be out working with business, participating in workshops, and they can own a small feature, but they have to own everything, right? End-to-end adoption, rollouts, whatever, right? So that brings a very different sense of ownership and enablement very fast, right? And then the growth path is only about taking on more complexity. Then the other one is being able to go to other companies and become ambassadors and leaders there. So that's more mid-scale. These are people who come to us with 4 or 5 years of experience, spend a couple of years working with multiple group companies doing variety of initiatives and projects. And that 6, 7, 8 year time is when we think they are right to go to one of the group companies and enable a team building exercise or an enablement exercise there.
It's very evident that you're actually hiring the future leaders of your company from the way you're describing this, which is very different from some of the multinational companies where the pathway could be a lot longer before you reach the headquarters in a different country.
I think that's another reason why centers of excellence help. To do that in group companies or to look at the comp structures in group companies can be a little tougher, battle to fight. But those exceptions and those exceptional career paths are easier to do in some sense with these smaller centers of excellence.
Interesting. So, Amitesh, if I were to put a crystal ball in front of you, and you're able to rub it, and 3 years, 4 years, 5 years down the line, we're sitting in a similar conclave, 2029, and we're talking about how GCCs in Indian companies have evolved. What would be your prediction?
I think taking the precedence of what we are doing and how the future should or would look like will be very exciting, because the way the COEs and the capability centers we are running at Vedanta, we are very tech-focused. And we don't want, as I said, we just don't want to be a cost center, but we want to be a contributor to the overall operations. And we are seeing, when I joined Vedanta and I was told that we need to put in some Gen AI solutions, I was very skeptical and apprehensive that, in a metal and mining company, how are you going to implement some of these? And, we have been working with nasscom, and they have been very helpful in terms of finding the partners as well to support this. Then I realized that this is a very long journey which we have started. And I think we're just scratching the surface when it comes to the technology and what we are able to implement through these COEs. So the future is really exciting. And I could see, and the way Vedanta operates is very lean in terms of the employees, and most of them are something outsourced or through these capability centers, a centralized function. So I think that's something very interesting. And as I said, that one of the elements which is, I would say it's challenging, but it's an opportunity as well, and it works something that we have to have a top-down approach. And I'm trying to implement at what I learned from my GE days is, our top-down approach when it comes to change management works much better, and especially when you are trying to implement something which is emerging, which is new, and people are apprehensive. They don't want to adapt something as new as what you're trying to, because they believe that they have been doing this for a while and they are the best. Yes, they are the best, but something new should always come in to optimize and see how you things do differently. There's an example where there was a gentleman who used to see the flame color of the blast furnace in our steel plant and used to determine that how much oxygen, air, etc. needs to be pushed in the blast furnace. Now that has been replaced through computer vision enabled with an AI module, and it automatically gives notification on mobiles of these operators as to what needs to be done. Doesn't mean that the role, of course, it has evolved, because he was the gentleman who actually helped as to how this module could look like, and he partnered with that startup. So that's how the roles are changing, and I believe it will be a very exciting journey 3 to 5 years down the line, and we will be doing much better things as to what we are doing. As I said, it's just not going to be a process, but something where you're adding value to the whole operation and be part of that. I think that will excite people as well.
I mean, really so exciting. If I go back 5 years in time and see what progress we have made, and I just try to take exactly what you said and project that 5 years more, I get the goosebumps and I get the layers of excitement and saying, this is really, we're still scratching the surface. Vivek, what does your crystal ball say?
If I look a few years ahead, I think one is, if these centers of excellence pull it off, what they're tasked to do. One, I think the groups, our company's dependencies on external agencies will reduce. And I think some of the centers of excellence we have today will shift to companies. They would have built their own capabilities, and they'll be reasonably independent from group functions. And at a group level, we would have built newer capabilities, based on whatever is emerging. That's one trend I see. A lot of the talent we have in these group functions would in 5 years have moved on to take on leadership positions in these group companies or maybe outside world somewhere. And that's one trend I see. The other one is, I think in terms of talent, right? I don't know how much of that has happened already. I think it's a challenge. But in 5 years, I think talent will see the ECCs or the capability centers of Indian group companies as great career building opportunities, right? Because the kind of problems we are solving and how close they are to business and to strategic leadership is something that MNCs in India will not give, for example. Right? It's very different. And the second piece to the ecosystem, I think there's probably, there's a lot of vendor companies, there's a lot of service providers. Again, the idea is not for us to build everything in-house. We cannot. So the hunger and the readiness to work with vendors is extremely strong. And I see a lot more of this ecosystem working with Indian companies in a very strategic way, whether it is to kickstart their journey or to test out their products or any of those areas. I think Indian companies will be great test beds, especially for Indian startups.
Isn't that exciting, right? If I go to where I started this facilitation from, talking about cost arbitrage, clearly in the last 25 minutes, we haven't even talked about that. We've talked about the power of consolidation. We've talked about the synergies. We've talked about impact in business. We've talked about talent development. We've talked about the startup ecosystem. And we've talked about how collectively, not only do we bring an impact to the Indian businesses, but how we take that abroad to other countries where those are still going on. Even if I look around as a consumer of government services, my income tax return today is processed by a central processing unit, which is nothing but a GCC in a different form. My credit card application is processed by a central processing unit. And there's so many more examples out there which really are doing work in a collective strength and manner and bring that talent to the forefront, leveraging technology, leveraging capabilities, and bringing seamless continuity into their work and serving the customer. We're pretty much on time. I think we're 3 minutes ahead of time, and I'm sure NASSCOM would be very happy that we are keeping up to the time that we have kept. Any questions that would like to ask the panelists? Any questions from the group? Okay, so I think we're good with that then. With that, we can conclude the session. Thank you so much, Amitesh, and thank you so much, Vivek. It was a pleasure having you and getting your perspective on how your side of the show is going on. Thank you.
Thank you, Manoj. Thank you, Nas.
For more content on tech and leadership, subscribe to NASSCOM YouTube channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update.